My name is Vlad. I'm gonna talk about this new regulation, which I think is important for pretty much everybody who interacts with a computer or some kind of a mobile or IoT connected device. Louder. Okay, thank you. Right. Quick info about me. So maybe I'll just start with the question: who has heard about the General Data Protection Regulation? All right, excellent. That's actually really good news. A couple of thoughts about me. So I've just started coding. I have also, literally I'm on day 96 of my 100 days of code challenge. I am, since last week, the data protection officer for the company that I work for, Zimmer Biomet, where I work as a business analyst. I, in principle, have nothing to do with code, but I do handle the IT infrastructure over there. You can find me on GitHub or on Twitter. The reason why I thought this would be an interesting topic is as you clearly will know, is the fact that this new regulation comes into being in May, right? On the 25th of May. And this is quite important for all companies, from the smallest ones to like for self-employed, from self-employed to huge companies. I mean, Facebook comes to mind immediately, I think, when I say big companies and data protection. Let's just go right into it. So the GDPR has been created in order to get up to date with today's technology, right? Because there has already been something in play, right? If you read here, the aim is to protect all the EU citizens from privacy and data breaches. In our increasingly data-driven world, which is different from the time when the 1995 directive, which has been available until now, right? It's vastly different today, the world we live in today, compared to that. Who does it affect? This is also quite important. It's not just about companies who are active and operating in the EU area, but also companies outside of the EU who in some way collect or process any data, any private data from citizens within the EU. As I've said, it's coming into being it's going to start being enforced with the 25th of May. There have been in the media, for example, some alarming figures running around. Huge fines, up to 4% of a company's what's the word? The turnover, annual revenue. Thank you. I have to say that directly related to that, the training that I've attended. In the training, there have been different ideas running around, so it's not as strict as it sounds. This is more of a scare tactic. There can be massive fines, so if you are Facebook, yes, you can see something in that direction if you have a data breach. But for a regular company who, for example, has a data breach in terms of losing a laptop which contains some private data of some customers or some end users or anything like that. I have been given the example that a fine is around 500 euros. So if you fail to register this breach with the authorities. Right. How do we get about knowing more about knowing how to implement this? And actually, I'm gonna pass what I think is a very good checklist. So maybe you can have a look at this. This has been downloaded from the Privacy Officer's website. It's available in German and in English. I'm gonna have the link in the end. So there are some Austrian websites which are very well set up, and they have very good information, including forms, including how-tos and best practices. But generally, it's very well documented on a EU level. So if you can think of the best documentation for your favorite, let's say, programming language, I would say it's on par with that, right? So just Google it, and you will come to some answer. What are we talking about in terms of data processing? So we have in the programming world the concept of crud. I would say instead of create, read, update, and delete, we would look at collect, read, update, and delete. So it would start from gaining access to data all the way to deleting the data, and we will talk more in more detail about that in a minute, and everything in between. What is personal data? This is basically any kind of information that directly identifies a person, regardless of their role. So be it somebody in their literally role as a citizen or their role as an employee of company X or Y. This is irrelevant. What is relevant is they can be identified by it. There will be some differences between countries, for example. I've understood that in Germany, a person's work phone and email is also included in the GDPR. So if you have access to their work email or their work phone, then it is to be treated regarding the same kind of rules and regulations. I'm not sure if this is the case in Austria, but it's a better safe than sorry idea, I would say, that's best applied in such cases. If we move on straight to to talk about concrete examples regarding the development, web development or development in general area, we have identifiers online. So we have IP addresses, we have cookies, and I'm sure you can immediately think of 5 other examples if you take your concrete, because I've seen many hands in the air when the question was asked, who is already working as a web developer? So let's just make this interactive and see who can think of other examples from their experience already at work. What can be private personal data which can be used to identify a person, and they've come across it either by them realizing, oh, we're storing this in our backend, we're storing this in our cloud database, which we don't even know if this company which is providing the cloud database is compliant with the GDPR. We know we are, but we don't know if this company that is our third-party supplier, let's say, is or is not. So does anybody have any ideas of concrete examples maybe from day-to-day work? Okay.
I think if it's possible, we'll save the interactive part with the questions in the end because of the recording. But if it works
okay.
Right now with part of the topics.
I thought it's easier to make it interactive because then it's the subject, the topic is so dense that there's no way I can make justice to it within half an hour or less or whatever. I don't know how much time I have. So basically interacting and getting you to maybe think about it is actually better than just presenting maybe a quarter of what I could present, and then at the end you're left only with a quarter. If nobody can think of an example, I'll just move on. So I have some cases here. Websites. Right, you're going to have a privacy policy. This has been the case so far, but the way the privacy policy has to look is different nowadays. In terms of the GDPR, the privacy policy has to be in simple English. If anybody has read a Wikipedia article in simple English, so it has to be understandable on any level, not just people who have a degree in law, for example, or let's say are masochists and want to decipher whatever it is that you've tried to hide in the privacy policy terms. Registration forms, right? So this is the point, the simplest example that I could think of where you would be collecting the data. at that point, you already have to start thinking about the entire process, right? So if you have a registration form, you're going to ask for a name, you're going to ask for maybe you're going to ask for an email address, you're going to ask for a phone number. This is enough. This is sensitive enough. This is where you have to start thinking, okay, what am I going to do with it? So the purpose is very important, because the GDPR, on top of what has been existing so far, says that the documentation of the data is very important. The documentation of the purpose of the collection of the data. So if you don't have a purpose for having that data, don't ask for it. Not only that you have to have a purpose, but you have to be aware and document how long you're going to keep the data. So you cannot have it indefinitely. If you've fulfilled your purpose, the one that you've already been stating in your documentation, you have to delete it. There are few exceptional cases where you can actually keep the data for longer past the moment of your specified purpose. If we stay with the registration form, right, let's say you're within your purpose timeline, but you've gotten a call from the person, and the person has asked, what kind of data do you have on me? This is the kind of right that the person has. You have to be able to answer within a specified timeline, if I'm not mistaken, 72 hours. If for some reason you're running such a huge database that you are not able to process this request within the 72 hours, you can get I don't know, another 48, I'm not sure. And that's about it. So it depends on what kind of database you're running, but this is where you get to another point. I would say this is a back-end issue. You have to have the technical means to process such requests within the required timeline. If you don't have the technical means, you have to, let's say, get them. You have to put them into place. My database does not allow for such quick processing of such requests, that doesn't fly. So that doesn't work. I don't know if it worked until now, but it definitely doesn't work starting with the 25th of May. Right, so a person asks for the data. Let's say that's a simple case. What if they want to transfer their data? Whatever it is that you've been storing. Let's go on to mobile apps, and let's think that you have some users, and one of them is calling you and says, look, I want to have my data from you, everything that you've been storing, and I want to download it from you and move it over to this other provider of the same service, let's say. You have to be able to do that. So if you think in terms of CSVs, JSONs, XML. This is the kind of medium that you're going to have to provide, to be able to provide, so that they can actually port their data to another system. And then what else do we have? So the data portability, deletion, that's a big one. Because deletion, I mean, it affects everything, right? I've got backups here. The user calls you, you tell him, we have your address, your phone number, and let's say your surfing habits. Right, he says, delete it, please. Not only are you going to have to have a process in place in order to perform this data destruction properly, you're going to have to be able to document that. You're going to have to be able to prove this to whatever inspection comes your way. But you're going to have to deal with your backups. So again, I'm going to ask a question. If nobody comes up with a quick answer, I'm going to move on. But who can think of a way to properly destroy data, including the backups? Because yes, this is necessary. So backups are not excluded when the person says, I want you to delete all of my data. All right, I'm going to assume that nobody's in charge of the decision making of the infrastructure, and because otherwise I imagine you would have concrete examples of what I'm asking right now. One example that I found online then, because I definitely don't have any I mean, I am in charge of the backups with my company, but only marginally. One example that I found is that you could have encryption, if I understood correctly. You could have an encryption key. First of all, when you delete the data, you should keep the ID of whatever it is that user had on them on a separate file, right? You've deleted 100 users. You should keep their ID, and you should also encrypt it. And the moment that that they want their data deleted, you should no. Hold on, I'm getting confused now. I just realized the idea. Sorry.
We need to have a record of whatever you delete with a time when you.
But an anonymized record, because otherwise you haven't done anything. Yes, just the ID. I realize now that the example was correct, but for the wrong thing. So the reason you keep the list of IDs is because when you restore from backup, you're going to have to redelete that user's data in case you haven't gone into your backup and deleted when they requested it. It's a very much a gray territory there, because so theoretically it's very difficult to delete from your backup, right? To go and delete from your backup.
You can't.
Oh, well, everything is possible, but technically and then time-wise, it's quite difficult, right? So one possibility is you don't delete from your backup, but you're keeping this list of IDs, and the moment you restore from your backup, so that you don't run into the trouble of, oh, I've got the data again, which I was supposed to have deleted. You use the ID and you redelete the data, which is related to that ID. And there was another concept about encrypting and then basically deleting the encryption key. I'm sure you can do more with that than I do. What else do we have? Device theft, right? So I don't know if this is a direct influence on somebody who only works on the software side of things, but this is a serious data breach, right? Because a device theft means you're going to get access to a database, you're going to get access to some systems, you're going to get access to a hard drive, even forgetting about VPNs or whatever. If we're talking about device theft, we are talking about encryption, right? So I'm gonna skip over to key concepts. Data encryption for everything, as much as possible, right? Because if it's encrypted, the moment you present a data breach, because this is how it's supposed to happen after GDPR is in play. I thought I saw you looking at the time. How much time do I have? I have no idea.
Let me give you the rundown 1 second. You've gone for about 18 minutes.
Okay.
If we can give another 15-ish, it's
cool.
fine.
Right. So, where was I? Where was I?
Encryption.
Encryption, right. If you have stuff encrypted, the moment you report your breach, you are, let's say, in a much better position than if you had no encryption on whatever device you were working with, whatever databases you were programming, setting up, and so on and so forth. Because if you say there is encryption, even though they have access to the hard drive, it's more difficult or impossible to actually get to the data that was stored on it. I'm just gonna go back because this idea of mass monitoring I think is important. Mass monitoring, the simplest example is like a time logger when you come to work, right? That's a form of employee monitoring, because let's not forget I would say the most important private data that you are going to handle is going to be your own, right? We immediately think of those other people that we gather data on, but actually your own is going to be equally important, if not more important. So when you go to work, You're being monitored. In theory, any form of mass monitoring, if there's any kind of camera at work in any corner, that's going to require, starting now with the GDPR, it's going to require a form of risk assessment. And only based on that is it going to be possible to move on with this form of mass monitoring. And then moving on to profiling, this is super sensitive. Profiling is basically any form of automated decision making, any form of automated data processing, and then decision making. So if there's no person literally standing between the information and the decision based on that information, then you have a form of profiling. It's a whole different problem. Basically, ideally, people should shy away from that. I had a thought in mind, and maybe Daniel actually can help, because I know that his specialty is law. But let's say the most basic example of what I would understand as profiling, you have a form where, based on, let's say, age, you filter people out, right? So that when they try to register as users, you filter everybody under 16 years old, right? But you're going to do that in code, right? There's no person saying, he's 15, but based on whatever else, I'm going to let him through. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that a form of profiling? Is that...
I think so, yeah. Because you limit a certain range of people on certain specifics of that group. For example, age.
Yeah.
And this is some form of profile. So
Yeah.
from my side,
Yeah.
I would say yes.
I also thought that it is, but since it was my own example, which I could give myself with the little code that I know, I thought maybe that's not a form of profiling. But so you take from there and you go up to machine learning, which is like definitely profiling, let's say, if you use any kind of private data to feed and teach a machine, train a machine. Yeah, you have a whole bunch of things to think about and to treat accordingly. Right, key concepts. Obviously, the consent is very important. So if you think of the simplest examples in terms of like people accepting your cookies, it has to be, as far as I understood, it has to be an active. It has to be active. So if it says, if you continue within the next 5 seconds with, I'm just making this up, with surfing our web page, this for us means you've accepted our privacy policy. That is a no-go. So it has to be an active opt-in, right? So opt-in instead of opt-out. For newsletters, right? Up until now, there were definitely many cases where the checkbox was already ticked. You're not allowed to have that anymore. Absolutely not. It has to be a positive affirmative action in order for the person to agree to be part of whatever it is that you're going to process their data for. Right, consent should be withdrawable from the user's page. I'm sure everybody can think of at least one example of some web page where you could not find how you can delete your users, like your profile. That's against the law. Maybe it was until now, probably it was, but definitely this has been specified right now. Data protection by design, right? Before you even start write coding in your case, you're going to have to think about the entire flow of data, and you're going to have to plan for it. So logging of personal data, that's in principle a bad idea. If you do have logs, including personal data, the GDPR states that if it is provable that it is in your company's interest to keep those logs, you can do it. But you're going to have a very good reason for it. Data minimization. This is also a key concept, right? Do not ask for anything that you do not need to have. If you have a form, if you have a registration form, and you're going to ask for their income, if you're gonna, even in, you know, bracketed, if you're gonna ask for any kind of superfluous information, better not. And this goes back to the DP by design, right? Think in the beginning what you truly need, because you have to think about how long you're gonna keep it, you're gonna have to think about your goal, and so on and so forth. And all of this, if you get an inspection, you're gonna have to present with the appropriate documentation, with the appropriate processes in place. Pseudonymization. This is the best way, or one of the easiest way, I'm not sure if it's easiest, but it's definitely one of the best ways to ensure that you have as little headache with the GDPR as possible, right? If there's no possibility of identifying a person with whatever data you've stored, then you're in the green. You don't even need to worry about the documentation, right, and about the whole process. It's probably easier said than done, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Transparency, I've put this in because the easier it is basically for the end user to get to know what it is that you're storing on them, what it is that you're processing, and what you're doing basically with their information, the better it is, right? The more transparent you are. Data encryption for everything, opt-in instead of opt-outs, and age checks for children under the country's legal age. If I'm not mistaken, in Austria, it's like the fully ended 14th year of age. You're going to need adult permission to gather their data, right? So think about you're not screening them, right? You're not screening the kids in your registration form, but if they are under 15 years of age, right? How do you get this adult permission? Parents, actually, adult is wrong. It's the parents' permission. And I was reading online, there was a funny example of you're going to have a selfie with the parent. Because if one thing was, I think one example was the email from the parent. The parent should send an email, you know, with their consent. But of course, the kid can easily create an email address and fake the parent's permission. So stuff like selfie with the parent and so on and so forth. There are areas where the GDPR is rather vague, so that's why people are thinking about how to get this done. Right, sources. Maybe this is the wrong order. So the official website of the GDPR would be this one. They have like bullet points on what is different, what has changed. I would say very, very useful is the privacy officers, because this is a Verein, if I'm not mistaken. What's the word for Verein? A non-profit organization, right? Which is made up of counselors, people working in law, and they provide. There's a forum, so they provide answers to questions. And I think they also prepare forms and you know, checklists and the steps that are needed to become compliant. And then there is the Daten Cockpit, and this is a website which has been put together because there is, for every big company, this I would say influences you less unless you're in charge of creating this, which could also be. Every company is supposed to have a so-called register, the Verzeichnis. So far, there was a central register where all the data had to flow in terms of this privacy information that the company stored. Now it's no longer centralized. It goes into the responsibility of all the companies, of each company individually. And so now most of the companies, all the way down to the self-employed people, they are going to have this kind of register, which documents what do they do when somebody asks them what kind of data you have on me? Or what do I do as a company when somebody asks me to delete their data? Or what do I do when they ask me, I want to port my data to Facebook? Give me whatever you have on me. So all this documentation with all the you know, the reasons why you store everything and everything that we've been talking about, all of this has to be in one big file database in principle is recommended, and Daten Cockpit is trying to offer like a solution for that, a like a ready-made solution for that. They're not yet fully operational, but I think they will be. They said beginning of April, so I'm expecting any time now. Right? Yeah, I'm done. Thank you for your attention. I hope I did not absolutely kill the mood here. And yeah, any questions?